Today on Stronger Than Reason, we get a spiked flail to the face with the dark metal tabletop role-playing game, Mörk Borg. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. So, today's topic is just something fun, something that you might argue is outside this show's bounds, but surprise, this show, in fact, has no bounds other than it's always going to present something that I find interesting. And I find today's topic pretty interesting. In fact, I've gone down a rabbit hole with it in recent months. I'd argue that it is music adjacent. Specifically, it's adjacent to metal and also punk rock, which, aren't things that I listen to a lot, but I do listen to some, and my favorite music does have some of those influences. So yeah, I would argue that it's relevant. So there. It's also been an unstated side thread of this show to explore topics that I can only describe as things from Sweden that are awesome. I mean, we've already had whole episodes devoted to Ghost and Viagra Boys, and those were episodes 52 and 53, back to back no less. And I've certainly talked about ABBA on and off. What's not to like about ABBA? Nothing. There's nothing not to like about them. That's what. I mentioned them in 3 previous episodes. Guess which ones and when. But yeah, it's odd how many awesome things come from Sweden. What is it about that country? I think that it might have something to do with the long, dark, and cold winters. Folks there just need a lot of diversions to get through it. So they do what any of us would do. They go out and form black metal bands. So have you ever seen this map on the interwebs? It's from user Mapley on Instagram. I want to give credit where it's due, and I'll describe it for those who are listening to the podcast. It shows the prevalence of black metal bands across the world's countries. And one thing is immediately apparent. Scandinavia is the black metal capital of the world. In fact, of those countries, Finland appears to be the most metal of all, which is news to me. What's up with that, Sweden? Come on, you got to get it together. But it's also interesting that Chile has it going on, and Portugal, and Greece of all places, and what's this? Canada has more black metal bands than the United States? Who'd have thought? Well, I guess this shows maybe a positive correlation between latitude and playing black metal, because even Australia is getting into it. But, in the tropics, not so much. I guess when it's really hot out, you don't want to invoke the fires of hell, which makes sense, really. So anyway, yeah, we know Sweden is already great because they have Ghost and Viagra Boys. So I wasn't at all surprised to find this other awesome thing coming from there. And how it happened was kind of interesting. See, I already shared with you that I collect vintage dice for some reason because, I'm a middle-aged nerd and I have to have some kind of pointless collection. And since I can no longer collect Scud missiles or original oil paintings by Alan Bean, the 4th person to walk on the moon, I collect vintage dice. Now, some of these are what I'll call traditional 6-sided dice. For instance, you have these so-called Asian-style dice, right, which always show the 4-side in red for some reason. And they have an enlarged red pip on the 1, and the 2 pattern is kind of unusual. So that's kind of neat. And you don't see them much in the United States. I had to hunt those down online. But by and large, I collect rare dice by a United States company called Chessex that makes both traditional 6-sided dice and the sort of polyhedral dice that are commonly associated with tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. So, for instance, here is the first set of theirs that I got. These are called Marble Ivory with Black, and they're still in print. They're one of my favorite sets. The swirls in them are just awesome, and they kind of look like they're bone or something like that. Now, I don't collect dice because I play D&D these days, or really any role-playing games. I just collect them because I like the dice. And I have nothing against role-playing games. I did collect a lot of the D&D books as a kid, the first edition hardbacks and modules and stuff. And you might ask, why did I do that when I didn't play the game? And I guess I did it just because I found it interesting to read. I thought it was pretty creative, modeling an imaginary world like that. And of course, I liked reading about all the crazy monsters and the monster manual and the fiend folio and whatnot. And I still do have all that stuff safely tucked away in the archives, waiting to be unearthed for some massive first edition campaign I'll no doubt pull together someday. Yeah, right. I probably stopped reading all that stuff around 13 or 14 or so maybe I outgrew it a bit, or so I thought, because I did fall into a group of players in high school and found myself playing D&D with them for a while, and I gotta say, it was a blast. I remember just a lot of laughing and a lot of really unhealthy snacks. And this was with my old karate gang, so guys that I really looked up to for the most part. And they were just almost superhuman in some ways, the stuff they could do. And for sure, some barbecue chips and corn curls didn't seem to slow any of them down, since they were all just, near indestructible older teenagers, as we all used to be. But the sessions were led by this one guy who was pretty well spoken, and he had a great imagination and a good sense of humor. And he made the game just really fun, and it came alive. And what I realized at that time was that D&D was really just communal storytelling, and the dice and the rules and the mechanics of the game that I had been so into reading about were really not that important by comparison. What was important, the magic sauce as it were, was that we were creating a story, and that story was interactive. It was something that I could control somewhat. And it was really the same idea as with lucid dreaming, which, if you remember, coincidentally, was also a very in thing in the late 80s. It was a bit of a fad. Lucid dreaming, of course, is this idea of training yourself to be aware that you are dreaming and to give yourself the ability to control your dream narrative, acting out any number of otherwise impossible situations. And in both cases, D&D and lucid dreaming, the idea was that it was a fantasy world that you could control. And there's something compelling about that, especially when your usual day-to-day life is pretty boring and consists mostly of, going to school and or work. So you might be interested in a little escape of some kind, right? So yeah, D&D with those guys was a lot of fun, but it ended. But what happened was that I graduated from high school, I quit karate, I went to college, and pretty much never looked back. I moved away, and with very few exceptions, I kind of lost touch with that whole gang. So cue a montage of real life happening to me for the next 30 years, in which the collaborative storytelling occurred between me, my wife, and our growing family. So now you see the circle closing, right? Because there's me a few years ago getting interested in these old collectible dice, and maybe it's no surprise that I started looking at D&D again. So, in fact, last Christmas, my kid got me a copy of the D&D Arts and Arcana book, which is so big that I can barely show it on camera here. It's a beautiful coffee table book, over 400 pages, full of vintage D&D art, going all the way back to its earliest days. And this was great for me because not only did it recap all of the D&D history that I missed and get me caught up on what was going on, but the first edition stuff, looking at those illustrations and paintings again, really took me back into that mid-'80s headspace and reminded me what it was that got me interested in all that stuff way back in the day. The early D&D art was almost amateurish by today's standards, but it was so abstract and weird that back then it really captured my imagination, particularly the stuff by Errol Otis, which was way out there. That guy just had a very unique style. So one day I was browsing the dice groups online, as I do, looking for deals and whatnot. And this is what you do when you're an obsessive collector, as I'm sure you understand. You're pretending you're looking for deals, but what you're really doing is looking for shots of serotonin, because you get a boost whenever you find something good, right? Your brain rewards you. So you're collecting for that kick. It's all about the search, really. It's not about the having as much, at least for me. Anyway, on that group, someone posted a picture of some cool-looking dice, and if memory serves, they were yellow with black numbers, but they had these red blood splatters all over them. And the comment was like, "Hey, I found the perfect dice for Mörk Borg." And that something about that phrase caught my attention, Mörk Borg, because as an English speaker, those are two words I don't expect to see together. Because to me, growing up in the U.S., Mork meant the beloved alien that Robin Williams played in the sitcom Mork and Mindy, and Borg were the cool industrial-looking aliens in the Star Trek shows, you know, the ones that were likely personally responsible for inspiring every single album by Frontline Assembly. So they were maybe two related but vastly different concepts. So what the hell was this thing, Mörk Borg? I was intrigued, and naturally, as you do, I searched on it. And the first thing I found was the main website, mörkborg.com. And at this point, I have to address the Mörk Borg creators here. How on earth did you not get the domain mörkb.org instead? I mean, come on. What a miss. Anyway, yeah, the real address is mörkborg.com. And what did I find there? Well, first, I found a lot of yellow and black. And I quickly realized that whatever this thing was, and I still didn't understand it, design was a very important part of it. And that got my attention because in my book, if the design is good, I'll take that over content all day, which, you know, explains the last episode I just did on Jandek and my interest in that. It perfectly explains about half of my record collection, actually, not to mention most of my book collection, and maybe explains New Order's success over the years, too, to boot. And really, the website sums up Mörk Borg better than I ever could, so I'm just going to quote here, "A doom metal album of a game, a spiked flail to the face, light on rules, heavy on everything else." And then there's a list of all the awards they've won, best writing, best layout and design, product of the year, best game. So like, okay, I'm impressed, right? So as I was scrolling down, I'm seeing various aspects of the game, all with this crazy attention paid to things that really matter to me, like artwork, fonts, contrast and tone and composition and so forth, the colors. The whole presentation pretty much blew me away, and I learned that Mörk Borg is a very rules-light tabletop role-playing game that's inspired by only the heaviest black doom and or death metal, so take your pick. And I just started laughing because everything about this was just so brilliant. And my Arts and Arcana book related how D&D had been criticized over the last half century for being too complicated, too rules heavy, and, you know, nearly every edition has been an effort to streamline the rules, to make it more approachable, but it's also been criticized for being too sanitized. And I'm old enough to remember when TSR got rid of all the old demons and devils in the second edition as a response to the great satanic panic of the 1980s, when fundamentalist moral majority parents were wringing their hands over the idea of D&D causing their kids to go out and commit cattle mutilation and child sacrifice and register as Democrats. And of course, all of us kids at the time thought it was just a complete cop-out by TSR because, of course, we understood even then that demons and devils were imaginary creatures with no basis in reality, and that a game wasn't going to encourage you to go out and commit actual crimes, and neither was it likely to consign you to an eternity of getting stabbed in the ass with a pitchfork by a guy wearing red pajamas. I mean, the whole thing was just silly. So to come out here and see a role-playing game that was both rules light and which embraced violent heavy metal aspects, the two aspects that at least part of the RPG community was clamoring for, I thought it was pretty refreshing, and maybe in retrospect seemed like a pretty obvious market to exploit, an anti-D&D, as it were. So at this point you might think, wait, Mr. Unnamed Stronger Than Reason guy, are you some kind of shill for this game company? Is this a paid promotion or just an infomercial for this thing? And I can say, whoa, hold on. Absolutely not. Not only am I not receiving a dime or any compensation for this, but the core game is absolutely cost-free. So if you're interested in playing this game, you can just go to the website and download everything you need right now without paying anything. So no, I'm not shilling anything. At least, and I do say this in all honesty, this episode is nothing more or less than the usual shilling that I do in this show by talking up old bands and their associated products, whether they be CDs, records, tickets, tour swag, branded coffins, or whatever. Really, isn't every episode of this show an ad for someone's stuff? And, believe me, it's not my stuff. I'm not the one benefiting here, Lord knows. As far as cash flow goes, I'm still well on the negative on this project with zero hopes or aspirations of that ever changing, and I really don't care. And let's face it, I'm no influencer. This show is way too small to influence anyone, and, money is not going to be a factor in anything that happens here no matter what. So yeah, go out to mörkborg.com and just check it out and just take advantage of the stuff that they're giving away for free. If this sounds interesting to you, just go for it. It costs you nothing. And that's exactly what I did at first. I thoroughly explored their website, and I was impressed not only at the content and the game itself, but if I'm being honest, mostly at just the presentation of it all, the careful design that's evident in the site itself. There are very many web tools to help gameplay, and just all the freely downloadable modules and extensions and stuff. So here is the thing, though, that you do want to be aware of in the interest of full disclosure. They are selling stuff. This is a company, and it's run primarily by the game's creators, a guy named Pelle Nilsson, who created the game, and his partner, Johan Nohr, who is in charge of design. And just imagine that for a second, a company that places equal importance on not only the content, but the design. That's what those two partners are doing. And I think that's pretty awesome right there. But what they are selling are entirely optional paper books of the core rules and a couple add-ons. And I do mean a couple add-ons as in like 2. And that's it. Oh, and they have some like t-shirts and stuff out there right now in their web store. So if everything you need is free on their site, why would you even buy anything? And the answer is because it's for nerds like me who like holding something in their hands. And speaking of that, here is the Core Rulebook. And this thing has to really be seen in person to be believed. But, they had me right there at the cover. And of course, I love some of Jeff Easley's covers from the old first edition D&D hardbacks, like his monster manuals and Manual of the Plains and Oriental Adventures. But I mean, like, come on, this cover here, this is just badass, for entirely different reasons. This thing, the logo type, the composition, like the whole thing, what does it remind you of? I mean, when I looked at this, my mind went immediately to like punk rock posters. Like this could be advertising a Misfits show, right? Or something by the Plasmatics, maybe. I mean, I don't know. This is just some really in-your-face design. The logo is so big, it doesn't even fit on the book, right? It's literally in your face. And this yellow just burns a hole in your retina and captures your attention. And I love the skeleton guy here. He's become something of a mascot for the game. And it pretty much tells you everything you need to know, right? There's no clever abstraction here. There's no subtlety. There's no sorcerer stroking his chin. No adventurer reaching to gently lift the lid of a treasure chest. This is a blood-drenched demon, and he looks like he was drawn by an angry 12-year-old on a Trapper Keeper. So that's the entire game, folks. I mean, if you can look at this cover and say, well, all right, then Mörk Borg is the game for you. And if not, that's fine, but you may as well shut this video off right now and go find something else to watch. I don't know, maybe an old interview with the Human League. But the details on here are amazing too. And I don't know if you can see this, but they put the spot gloss on the shield here. And the skeleton, there's no way you're going to see this on here, but the skeleton is actually embossed in the cover, which is neat. I mean, it feels cool when you feel it. And look at the credits here. So text and game design by Pelle Nielsen, graphic design and art by Johan Nohr, and Dead People. And then the company credits, there's Occult Ortmaster Games and something called the Stockholm Cartel, which sounds badass. And I think this logo would also just look pretty bitchin' on a t-shirt. Maybe the greatest thing, though, about this book is that it's not some ginormous coffee table book. And I don't want to put down Arts and Arcana, which is in fact completely awesome. And thanks again to my very thoughtful kid for knowing that I would love it, because I do. But this rule book, and indeed all of my Mörk Borg stuff, are in this sweet folio size, which is, I don't know, what is this? Is it maybe about half the size of an A4 piece of paper? Is that what you all call it in the UK and Europe? I don't know. It's about 8.5 inches this way by 6 inches this way for those who don't know what A4 is, like me. And here's the spine. And again, like, the title just barely fits. And I don't know that you can see this because the light is goofy here, but there's actually more spot gloss here. And it spells out a message, which is Psalm 7, which is a cool reference from the game world, which we'll get to in a little bit here. And, then the back, like, any questions? It's just a big satanic demon on the back. So, and up here on the left, which is the best part of all, really not suitable for those under 16 years of age. Right. Okay. Maybe the thing I love about this book the most, though, the actual physical book, though, is this great little bookmark that they have in here. I'm just a sucker for those. But anyway, the story behind the creation of this edition of the rules, as I understand it, is that Pelle and Johan did something like a Kickstarter to get this thing off the ground. And they broke their goal. But instead of just pocketing that extra cash, they turned around and just reinvested it in the product. And that happened several times. And every time they were just, adding more spot colors, more neat features, more textures, more cool stuff, just making the product better and better. And how punk rock is that? The end result is a damn work of art. And I don't know that I have a cooler looking book in my own library. And I have hundreds or thousands of books around here. I mean, this thing is just something else. So let's crack it open and take a quick look. And I'm not going to do like a page by page or dive into it too much. I just want to give you the flavor of this thing. So some of this art is just completely off the wall, and the fonts and the text and the tone of all of this. They do a lot of kind of mixed media in here too, and look at this great, there's like a mirror color here, which is amazing. That shows up a couple times in a few places. Great drawings that just take up the entire page. So they explain all the rules and so on, and how you do battle and the different kinds of classes that they have. And then there's a section on a few of the monsters that you can find, and a bunch of extra optional rules and things, and it's just super awesome. So what about the game is so cool, the game itself? Well, the whole idea is that it's a world in decay. It is the last days before the end of the world, and pretty much everyone is doomed. So right there, that's pretty metal. So unlike D&D, where you're encouraged to create a character and really, identify with it for as long as possible, the player characters in Mörk Borg are pretty disposable. So it's very, very likely that they're going to die in rapid succession in some horrible way. But that's okay, because you can either roll one up in about 2 minutes using some handy tables for everything, including names, or you can go online and use their free tool, Scumbirther, on the website to do it for you. In fact, there are tools out there for generating just about everything, including monsters and dungeons and treasure and curses and you name it. And all of this material is delivered as succinctly as possible. Again, it's like the opposite of D&D. You know, Gary Gygax like nothing more than just teeing off on a topic and going on and on about it forever with a lot of digressions and big sesquipedalian words to make the case that he knew what he was talking about and maybe try to impress you with his comprehensive knowledge or supposed comprehensive knowledge of the subject matter and simply generate more and more and more content for you to dig into. And yeah, does that remind you of anyone? You know, I feel really seen here. Anyway, with Mörk Borg, they cut through all the expository crap, all the exposition with Dumbledore, and just they give you a phrase or a short sentence to go on, and your imagination takes it from there. I mean, there's about 10 pages of lore in this book, as the kids call it. It's just very, very scaled back. But ironically, that makes it so much more compelling. Like, I find myself wanting to read novels set in this crazy world. You know, novels with the same design requirements as this rule book, preferably. Hell, I want to see a full-length Mörk Borg movie with a soundtrack by Buckethead and Keygen Church. I mean, come on, that's a no-brainer, Hollywood. Just like, get on that. So, some things that are awesome about the game in no particular order, okay? There's this mechanic called the Calendar of Necrubel, which is essentially an unstoppable countdown to an inevitable doomsday where each step unleashes another misery on the world. And the final misery is Psalm 7, which means the end of the world, at which time the rules state, and I quote, "The game and your lives end here. Burn the book." So, yes, how metal is that? Another thing is that the most basic weapon is a human femur, which, if you're wondering, does D4 damage. So, forget like magic users and fighters. The character classes in Mörk Borg, which are optional, by the way, if you find that too complicated, they include things like Gutterborn Scum, Fanged Deserter, and Heretical Priest. So, for monsters, you have things like blood-drenched skeletons, undead children trapped in porcelain dolls, and my favorite, the Wickheads, which are humanoids that have lanterns instead of heads, and they can magically douse light sources and are really, really fond of knives. So this rulebook also comes with a starter adventure, which is here in the back called, and look at that mirror, that is such a cool effect. It's called Rotblack Sludge, and it's interestingly printed on matte paper, which is unlike the rest of the rulebook, and it's just like maybe 15 pages long, and it looks like a pretty good adventure for people just getting used to this. And I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but my very favorite thing about it, and maybe my favorite thing about Mörk Borg as a whole, is that this adventure features a room with just two skeletons playing violins at the top of a 50-foot column. And the only instructions to the game master are, they ignore everything and everyone. I love it. I love it. Like, even though that's unacceptable because I want the full backstory on those skeletons. Another thing I really like about Mörk Borg, though, is the really subtle sense of humor through the whole thing. It's not taking itself too incredibly seriously. There is a sense of over-the-topness about it, which is, in my opinion, what makes it so metal. If that were missing, if it were completely sincere, it would kind of verge on being psychopathic. It's kind of like the difference between a film like Evil Dead and, I don't know, torture porn. You know what I mean? So there is some low-key humor here. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot to like. You know, it's funny, I think, that a human femur is the basic weapon, right? And it's funny that no matter what your character does, there is no happy ending because the world's going to end, right? And it's funny that there is a table for off-putting character traits like inveterate bug eater and you make jewelry from the teeth of dead people. So Anyway, every single page of this thing is just chock full of lunacy, and it's great to look at, and it's really a trigger for your imagination, and it was a real delight to read through it for the first time. And the whole look, the black, white, yellow, and pink, have become iconic for Mörk Borg as a whole, kind of a brand for Mörk Borg, and it's practically shorthand for the game at this point, in much the same way as like pink, turquoise, and black are shorthand for Pretty Hate Machine. So this thing took off, as you can imagine, and the creators, who had a small game studio with some other games, kind of found themselves in the middle of a genuine phenomenon. And how did they react? Well, their reaction is another reason that this game belongs in this podcast, because it was entirely in line with punk rock. They didn't do what the D&D folks did. They're not trying to milk this idea for themselves by putting out a lot of stuff, selling a lot of stuff, making a lot of product around this idea. In fact, they have kind of divested themselves of all of that, because what they did was they drafted a third-party license agreement, which you can read on their website, and it's all very clear. The gist of it is that they grant anyone the right to make content inspired by the game, compatible with the game, and to sell it without paying the creators or even asking permission. Pretty much all you have to do is declare compatibility with Mörk Borg using particular language and or logos. And hundreds or maybe thousands of people have done exactly that. As far as I can tell today, there are only 3 books you can purchase from the original Mörk Borg creators. There's the Core Rulebook, which is that delicious hardback we just looked at, and these 2 optional add-ons, which are not hardbacks, which are nevertheless pretty sturdily made. In fact, to me, they look a lot like the old indie zines we used to buy in the 90s. Remember those? I don't even know if they still do those anymore, if the kids are into that. I'm thinking sort of like Comet Bus was one that we were into, and I still have a few issues of that lying around. Not to mention a big old omnibus edition. I should maybe do an episode on that someday. But anyway, yeah, these are essentially zines, which is just so great. I love the idea of lowering the bar, right? Like anyone can make one of these things, just add some really sweet art and make it awesome. It doesn't have to be a $35 hardback with an oil painting by Boris Vallejo on the cover. With most of the money going to pay Gary Gygax's legal bills or whatever. So anyway, Phylactery does have some cool features. It does have these badass spot reflections on the eyes here, which I think is super cool. Heretic is got this awesome devil dude on the cover. I mean, wouldn't you want to just buy these things if you saw them? Like, obviously they're going to have something cool inside. I mean, you just want to look inside it. I would, because I find that really compelling. And both of these are branded as part of the Mörk Borg cult, which is the name that the company uses for content that comes to them through their third-party license agreement. Though in this case, they did adopt that content and put it out as official add-ons. So currently, I understand their third-party license submissions are closed due to a completely overwhelming response, because so many people submitted new stuff. But who knows, maybe more of this sort of approved content is forthcoming. So what's in Phylactery and Heretic? A lot of optional rules, a lot of really cool art. I'm not really going to go through them completely page by page, but suffice to say, again, you really don't have to buy any of this stuff. Much of this material is already available for free downloads on the website. I just bought it because I like to have this stuff to hold it in my hands. In general, I buy books. I buy a lot of books. I like to read, and I prefer to read actual books as opposed to ebooks that make me stare at my stupid phone even more. So screw that. Frankly, too, all this Mörk Borg stuff is priced pretty reasonably, in my opinion, given that, the content is so well thought through and put together, and that the package is just really the quality is amazing. So, I will definitely pay for art like that every time, because I'm that kind of guy. I don't want some dry-ass text file with no pictures. I like pictures, and if there are pictures of blood-drenched skeletons, all the better. So if you're a collector nerd like me, rejoice, because there are hundreds of third-party modules, add-ons, and whatnot for Mörk Borg, and they've all been developed by crazy, obsessed fans, and much of it follows this direction given by the original creators to, be concise, prioritize art and design, and just be as weird and compelling as possible. So there is a whole universe of content, so to speak, out there waiting to be discovered, and there's more coming out all the time. So, let's be real. That's an unusual commercial model for a company, and I commend Pele and Johan for not just simply cashing in on all of this. They're being more like Linus Torvalds and less like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. They're creating a open ecosystem that's more like a bazaar and less like a cathedral, to not coin a phrase so much as completely steal it. This approach might remind you of one of our earlier episodes, but if not, I'll tell you which one. It was episode 42, which was about 9 Inch Nails partnering with id Software on the video game Quake. id took a similarly non-standard approach, if you recall, to selling their games in the early 90s like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake, because they adopted a shareware model, the idea being to give an episode away for free and just charge for the full game. Well, Johan and Pele are doing something similar here because everyone who creates content under their third-party license is promoting their game and getting the words Mörk Borg on more tongues, right? And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. But it does raise a good point. What does Mörk Borg mean? The title, that is. Well, like I said, as an English speaker, it made no sense to me at all. I only thought of Robin Williams and of getting assimilated, and not in the cool skinny puppy way. But it turns out that Mörk Borg is Swedish and roughly translates to Dark Fort, which maybe not coincidentally is the name of the solo micro game that Mörk Borg is based on. And I thought it was super cool that my copy of Phyrextory also came packaged with this, a little pamphlet that's a copy of the original Dark Fort solo game, again in this very small folio format. It's the smallest RPG I think I have ever seen. The rules take up just a single page of whatever this is, A4, I suppose, both sides, and it just looks really cool. I haven't played it yet, but I am going to try to do that, and it'll be the first RPG I've played since those halcyon days in high school. You always play a particular character in Dark Fort, and it's not nearly as over the top as Mörk Borg, but you can see how one led to the other. And I think it's quite cool of them to include it for free with this other book. And I love the fact that they throw in extras, and they do with most of the stuff they sell. They're creating a culture that encourages their third-party content creators to do the same. And the fact is that they've set the bar pretty high as far as quality goes. They've trained the Mörk Borg audience to demand that high quality, both in the content and its presentation, which is great for the community. But yeah, Mörk Borg is Swedish for Dark Fort, which I admit made no sense to me until someone pointed out that Mörk Borg is quite close to Mörkborg. Mörk is in murky, meaning dark or difficult to see through, and Berg is in the Germanic suffix used by plenty of mid-Atlantic towns to denote a city or fortification, for instance, Pittsburgh, Williamsburg, and so on. So yeah, Mörkborg is almost a literal translation of Mörk Borg, and I do understand that the umlauts over the O are not just heavy metal umlauts, but they do in fact affect the pronunciation, making it closer to Mörk Borg, though I sound really pretentious saying it that way, so I'm not going to do it, even if it is correct. I could pull that off if I were a native Swedish speaker, but I'm not that cool, so I'm not even going to try. There is one other thing I have here in my little collection that I managed to pick up. It's a third-party thing called Solitary Defilement, and naturally it's presented in this cool limited edition box set of black-on-black design with glow-in-the-dark letters here, which is really cool. And it just contains a lot of cool stuff, including some simple rules for turning Mörk Borg into a solo game. So again, an opportunity for me to play around with it a bit without having to talk to other people or interact with them in any way. So that seems worth it in my book. And it also has some other rules for city crawls if you're sick of dungeons, and a handful of one-shot adventures. And it's just got completely amazing graphic art in it. And again, even with this third-party add-on, 90% of this is available for free download online. And if you did want to buy an e-copy of it, it's like really affordable. You don't have to be a prick like me and snipe eBay for the limited edition. So yeah, just download it as a PDF and look at it on your phone or your tablet, or you can even print it out at home if you want a hard copy. I love how the Mörk Borg community isn't primarily about monetizing. It's about building the community and enjoying it all together. And that's how it should be. In fact, that's what's making this stuff so compelling, that people are motivated to come up with great ideas and just get them out there. If you want to pay for it, great. You get some bonus stuff. If not, great. You still get enough to enjoy the game, which is, pretty much the model used by every crowdsourcing site these days. The old pay for premium model, which has now, I guess, surpassed the old shareware model as the primary way to fund cool stuff in the 21st century. And I think that's pretty rad. In a sea of people who are just trying to make a buck, some folks are still able to make awesome stuff just because it's awesome. And there you have it, folks. A very quick episode today because I just want some time to bring Mörk Borg to your attention. It makes me happy that people are still able to do cool stuff without a huge corporation, without a committee of MBAs doing focus groups and segmentation analyses for ways to maximize shareholder profit. This is all being done on punk rock rules, really. It's about the community working together. I don't think anyone's getting rich on this. And, I'm not going to lie, seeing something like this in this day and age gives me hope for humanity, that we may yet pull ourselves out of this, at least until the calendar of Necrubel hits Psalm 7. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason, either on YouTube or as an Apple or Spotify podcast. The show that rolled a critical fail this week against listener expectations, but remarkably succeeded in its saving throw against alienating absolutely everyone. Tune in next time when we equip a Zweihander and roll for initiative against, Coldplay, I guess. Or maybe Kanye West. I don't know. Role-playing is tough, I tell you. As always, I thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.